It's loading.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'll be co-moderating this session with Giulia. And we have a really awesome session about UX research and conversational AI. So I know it's a very broad topic, but I think it's so important. And as a designer, it's always kind of been part of my process to be involved with research and usability testing and all of that. But I realize that not everyone is kind of aware of what goes into it and how it works and how to do it and why it's important. So I really just wanted to learn more about how everyone else is thinking about it and their approaches, and especially with generative AI LLMs, how that changes. So yeah, let's just get into the questions. So the first one I have, actually, sorry, let's do intros first. So Nikoletta, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nikoletta, and I am a product researcher at Euphonia. At Euphonia, we develop a clinical conversational agent named Dora that automates conversations between clinicians and patients. And as a product researcher, I'm leading the UX research and kind of like extending that into more product strategy and development as well. So I'm very, very excited for our chat today and learning from all these amazing people here.
Yeah, Celene, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Celene Osiecka. I am with 24/7 AI. So we primarily focus on enterprise clients. So we deploy automated solutions for in voice and digital for a lot of enterprise clients like financial services, retail, telcos, travel, things like that. So yeah, so a lot of different experiences with enterprise clients that way, and have been in the industry, I would say, for about like 20 years or so. So it makes me feel really old saying that, but yeah, just in some way, either starting in the digital field and then eventually worked into the voice field, and now we do both. So yeah, excited to be here. And like Nikoletta said, learning a lot about what everybody does, and yeah, excited to chat with you all.
Awesome. Diana?
Hi, I'm Diana Deibel. I am the Chief Design Officer at Grand Studio, which is a human-centered design consultancy based out of Chicago. And we do a lot of product design, product strategy work, usually just very complex multimodal type of things. So my personal background is in qualitative user research and conversation design. So this is actually right in my wheelhouse of both of my loves. And I am excited to be amongst you all and also hear what everybody else is doing. I feel like this is like the old days of back alleys. Like, what are you doing? I need help.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim?
Yeah, I'm a conversation designer on the Alexa experiences team. So I work on their on Alexa voice modality, as well as some generative AI work. And previously I was at Elsevier working on generative AI. And before that, I was in the financial industry at USA working as a UX designer for the last 10 years. So the last year, 2 years or so, I've been doing conversation design and have made my way into generative AI.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you all for being here. It's great to have such an amazing panel. So yeah, let's get into the questions. So the first one I have is why is UX research important for conversational AI experiences in particular? And maybe we'll start with Diana for that one.
Sure. So I think with conversational AI in general, the thing that I've noticed is like the most important part of research is determining whether or not it's actually the right solution for the problem it's trying to solve. There are so many times that I feel like I go into these situations where people have this really great idea to, most of the time it's a chatbot. I don't want to besmirch a chatbot, but that's a lot of what comes up. And it's not actually the right venue or the right modality for what the problem is being solved. Barring that, I think the interaction piece is like the next most critical, because it's a blind experience, especially if it's voice instead of chat. So you have no idea how to move through it. It's not like the traditional screen where you at least have some kind of clue about like smashing buttons and figuring out where you could go. So you really, really, really have to ensure that the pathway that you are providing for folks is something that they can engage with and succeed in.
Does anyone else have, Celene?
Yeah, I could chime in. Yeah, so I mean, I agree with all of that. Totally agree. Yeah, the experience is not, I think the other thing I would maybe say is that, like I'm saying, it's kind of a blind experience where, and the other thing is that the typical, in our world anyway, the demographics that come in are these, we typically are in the customer service experience, right? Where they're trying to get something done quickly. So it just leads so much, their tipping point is so much shorter. So versus if you were doing something fun. And again, like Nikoletta, you were saying you're in the healthcare space. So same kind of thing where it's very sensitive. So if you're dealing with sensitive information or somebody that's trying to deal with information really quick, getting that information is just so much more critical, and user research will help you get there faster. So I totally agree that in our industry, it's not like an app or a fun game or something like that, where people can kind of be fine with bugginess or kind of being fun, figuring stuff out themselves. They're not in a mood to figure stuff out. They want to get to their answer right away. So that's another critical point, was doing all of that work ahead of time before we get to that user is usually really important for that experience as well.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. Like in healthcare, and Door is a voice assistant. So there is no menu, there is no some indication of what are the capabilities of the assistant. And like the research is there to understand the behavior of the user, their environment, what were they doing before, after interacting with the assistant, how do they feel about it? Because, we can very much focus on how can we make the design the best, or how can we make the technology the best that there is, but are we actually solving what needs to be solved? And Diana, I absolutely love that. Is it actually necessary that this problem is solved with a chatbot? Like, is this the best solution to that problem? So it's like always going back to that question.
Yeah, it's always a balance of what clients want. They come in a lot of times saying like, here, do this for me. And it's like, let's validate that, happy to try it with you. But a lot of times it's not like they have, especially because AI is now a buzzword, it's becoming a thing. So everybody kind of comes in with their own predisposed notions of what they want. And you're right. Yeah, it's not always necessarily the best solution of what users want. Totally agree.
Kim, do you have anything?
Yeah, it's especially UXR is especially needed in the generative AI space, because a lot of data that we do get are chat transcripts, or just mass amounts of data from user responses and assistant responses. So UXR really uncovers the why behind some of the responses that you get, some of the assistant responses you get through moderated research.
Yeah, and I've also found on a smaller scale, like it helps designers at least defend design decisions, and it just, it has a whole ton of benefits and helps you potentially get funding for some of the work that you're going to do. So yeah, it's very important.
Yeah, never thought about funding. That's a really good call. Yeah, if you're trying to get funding for that too, that would help justify for sure. And I totally agree, Kim, too, about the Gen AI thing as well. Yeah, even more critical. And I know that was one of your questions later, Emily, but just, so much more critical in Gen AI because it is so unpredictable, basically, of what it gives. So yeah, so really thoroughly testing it. I totally agree with that too, Kim.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's also like kind of usually the tendency that is opposite, because everyone feels like it's so easy, just throw it out. Whereas it's like, oh no, actually,
I know.
To spend some time on it.
It's funny. I was talking with Micah on another call. We were chatting, and she was saying before, as conversation designers, we were trying to make these things as human as possible, right? We were trying to just really make it sound very human-like, have very human-like. Now we're almost with Gen AI, we're doing the opposite. We're trying to make it not sound as human, because if it sounds human and it doesn't know it's a bot, we're going to get users going way, divulging information they shouldn't, a whole bunch of other things. So yeah, it's interesting now of the user research approach we have to take is like, no more asking to see if it's more of a human-like experience. Is, did you know that this was a bot? Because a lot of times they won't know. Yeah, it's true.
I was actually just talking about this with somebody the other day about how it feels like we've gone back, like almost to the, I come from more of like the VUI world, the voice response. So the DTMF, like where press 1 for sales, press 2 for customer service, that element where you have to teach the user how to use the system with things like Gen AI, where you're like helping people understand how to craft a prompt if it's fully open like that, versus what we've done, I think, for the last 10 to 15 years with more of these NLU platforms of trying to get the system to understand the user and respond back in a natural way.
Yeah, true.
So because I feel like UX research is kind of split into two different categories. It's like user research and then also usability testing. So I'm curious for everyone else, what the difference is between the two. And maybe Nikoletta will start with that.
Yeah, I can take that because I'm doing both. So like user research is more like finding insights from the users. What are the needs? What are their pain points? Their behavior around the system, and that can be done by user interviews or surveys, and kind of like a mixture of qualitative and quantitative methods. And then user usability testing, it's around like you have something out, it can be a prototype or your product itself, and you get users to test it out, and you check, did it perform as you expected or not? And that's like the discussion around Gen AI loops back into like usability testing is a bit more difficult. Like previously when we were testing like a rule-based assistant, you could see like the transcript of a voice conversation or over the chatbot and see like, oh, it fell back there, that is a problem. Whereas with the Gen AI, you actually need to read carefully because even the assistant will convince you that it's saying the truth, whereas it's hallucinating. So it's like it is kind of like continuously making sure that you're testing your product and its functionalities.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
I just wanted to add another anecdote to that, because it's also like sometimes I feel like we're trying to find out like where the mistake is. And sometimes just today someone shared with me a transcript where it was like, as a human, I really don't understand what the goal of this was. So it's like also being able to catch these like pieces of like, actually, if I would read this and I would try to answer it, knowing everything I know and everything I should provide to the user in this moment, I still do not understand. So being able to catch those as well, I feel like is important.
Yeah, I totally agree on the understanding, like in the user research, even usability testing to some degree. If you have access to the person that you're working with that's doing the testing or doing the initial research and asking that, yeah, why did you ask it that way instead of this way? Or why did you push this instead of that? You know, like we just had a call that came in the other day where we just saw it was looping on itself. So he was trying to say continue, and it was just, he was entering his member ID while he was saying continue. And it was just those kinds of things. I'm like, you know, it's so helpful to have the person there so you can understand that like you said, Nikoletta, understand their motivation. And typically that can happen, I think, in either stage, right? You can, as long as you have that access to that person to say, why were you doing that? What's your motivation? What was, why did you do it this way versus this way is so helpful. Because yeah, like you said, not always we can understand what's going on. It's from the data alone anyway.
Exactly. And like my background is in linguistics, so I'm very interested in this sort of thing. Like a user can do a user interview and I can see their conversation, and the way they describe it is completely different to the way they actually express themselves or the conversation went. So what we think we're talking about or how we think we phrase and we interact with something to the way we actually do is different. So it's very interesting to have both perspectives in.
Yeah, and I think from my experience, when I worked with more rules-based bots and IVR systems, I worked more closely with conversation, like UX design teams and UX research teams under the UX design umbrella. But now that I'm working with more LLMs and Gen AI, I work more closely with data science teams, looking at how they intake their data, how they evaluate their data, and I help with the evaluation metrics, as well as crafting like the assistant responses so that these data sets could be fed in to improve the LLM. So it's a little bit of a adjustment from doing a lot of moderated interviews, doing share outs for UXR findings. now I work with large data sets and Excel sheets a lot more. So that I saw that shift when coming into Gen AI.
Same, Kim. I just went through an experience. We just did Gen AI rules-based hybrid because there were pathways that needed to be really directed and like specific. And there were some that could be a little bit more open and broad. So it was like this combo of the kind of standard usability testing. And then like, I am not a data scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but I have a couple of researchers on my team, Anna Lathrop and Nick Dauschow, who put together this amazing like efficacy assessment that was like data science light, that was basically testing different like accuracy responses and reliability. So like we were looking at things like how frequently, like what's the consistency of response when you ask the same question over and over? If you ask it at different points in time or different days in a week, what is the response to get the same consistency across it? And then what is the accuracy? So like what you were talking about, Nikoletta, where like, sorry, I think it was you, talking about when it just makes stuff up and you're like, this seems reasonable. And then you like go to fact check it and you're like, no, that doesn't exist, or that's wildly wrong, or whatever the case may be. So it now feels like there's definitely, Kim, I think this like hybrid of trying to figure out like what's happening in the system as well as like how people then have to interact with it.
Yeah. Totally see that. Yeah, there's a whole other aspect of before we knew. So basically, we gave it does this input match the response you were supposed to give it, right? It was so much more simple. And now with Gen AI, it's like, does this input match, and then it's like blue sky. It could be anything, right? Like, is it right? Is it wrong? Is it accurate? Not accurate? Is it hallucinating? Is it, there's a whole bunch of outcomes that could come out with Gen AI that I feel like, the user testing paradigms that we have to use are definitely going to change, just like that. Like you're testing to see accuracy of the information of the world versus just the response that you originally provided. So it opens up a lot more chance of error. But I think that's where we can play a really good role, because we become as designers, we start to, we're going to become more of those, I don't know what to call the word, it's not prompt engineering. It's more about at the end of the cycle. So once it's built, how well is it performing, and is it meeting the user's needs? Is it not? Is it going overboard, not doing enough? So that's a whole aspect that I think we should add to our, whether we call ourselves researchers, testers, it's some other thing that Gen AI is going to, a role that it's going to create for us as designers that we really need. That's the bet. I think that's the human value of part of the Gen AI process that we all can contribute to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was curious, what I guess are the biggest things to watch out for when you're doing user research and usability testing, and what are the biggest mistakes people make? Diana, you want to start, or Nikoletta?
I just have a few things in mind, and
perfect.
like the biggest thing is like I think you can, or executives have already decided something, and you just prove a point that actually won't change anything, and there is this kind of like confirmation bias, that you ask leading questions or you find patterns of what you already want to prove. So that's like a big mistake that can easily be made, and kind of like undermines the value that UX research can bring into products and to companies. But then like around more usability testing, the obvious thing could be like, you test your product with not the target user group. So for example, for me, like we have one of our biggest use cases is around cataract surgery, which means that median age in the UK is 75. If we test that product only with 20-year-olds, then that is a problem in the research. But I'll let Diana add anything.
I 100% agree with all of that, like talking to the right people and making sure you're not leading questions. I think the other just sort of like general thing that I tell less experienced UXRs that I'm training up is just don't worry about the guide. especially in like generative situations, it is more important to understand the goal of what you're trying to do than understand and read off of a script. Because I feel like we miss opportunities for getting the information that we didn't even know that we were looking for if we stick too closely to the guide that we've put together and lose sight of the actual information that's coming at us.
Yeah, I think I think one of the ways that I found UXR to, and like one of the ways that one of my previous companies uses UXR findings, they put them, once they find their findings, they put them in Jira to be tracked and to be implemented into development backlogs. I think that's a huge opportunity to help have a cross-functional team. So having those UXR findings, being able to link them back to features or somewhere in the development backlog so they're not lost, because I feel like a lot of UXR research and findings are just in documentation like hellscape where they're just like a bit lost and they're hard to find. So having a process of tracking findings after these research studies have been conducted is really valuable. And I don't think that's at least talked about a lot or implemented a lot in the places I've worked at previously.
Totally agree with that. It's like one of the things that I did as soon as I got that role at Euphonia was, when I get an insight, I first of all log it in one place, in one insights library where everyone has access to it. It's linked to data. It's linked to any qualitative methods that I've added, like user interviews. And I'm working at a startup, so we have the privilege of being a small company, and we have a weekly meeting company-wide where we share those learnings. So sharing these and giving visibility along the process, like, keeps the report and keeps it also, like, builds trust around the teams. Like, if the engineering team and the product team know that what they will work on next month is something that I have found and like I believe in and we believe in because we've heard users say about it, then it also builds like a positive sentiment in the team and trust and like around visibility and easy access to the insights. Totally agree with that, Kim.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone has said. I totally agree. The only thing I think I've seen also that people make a big mistake about is they only do it once. So they do this at the beginning of the cycle, and then they're like, oh, we'll launch it and it's all done. We did our user testing, we launched it, it's perfect, and then they walk away from it. So that'd be my only thing, is that this type of improvement and like you said, insight gathering, Nikoletta, documenting, and all those things about like actually putting those insights to use. But that whole process has to happen multiple times. It depends on the frequency of how often you can make those changes. But sometimes we do it every week when we just launch a product. Sometimes we do it every month, but minimum every quarter. I think we go through that whole cycle of listening and gathering insights and things like that. Because things change, cyclical things happen, yearly things happen, demographics change, products change. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration. You just don't stop. You can't just do it once in this type of world. It's a living, breathing thing.
Yeah, I would be curious to hear about what others think as well about how often you should conduct user research, usability testing, different forms of it.
Yeah, I think that probably depends on like what your team size is, what your product is. I mean, I think if it's new, like you have to do it, period, several times before you launch it, because there's just like so much that you have to learn in order to make sure that it's going to land correctly. But if it's something that's like out in the world, I think like what you're talking about, Celene, Nikoletta, like that makes perfect, like the cadence that you're talking about once a quarter or so before any release, honestly, is the way that I usually try to frame this to people, is like, you don't want it to go out without knowing what to expect. You might not be able to fix it in time, but you better be prepared for whatever's going to happen.
Yep, agreed.
Any other?
Yeah, I think the beginning of the design phase, at the end of the design phase, any new feature release, use as much funding as available to you, basically. yeah, I would say use as much funding as you can, because it's your company's brand on the line, and that really builds trust if you can make sure that you can expect and tell support teams of any problems for future releases.
I'm curious, do you have any recommendations or like specific platforms that you use? And if you have any recommendations for like how many participants, if you're doing interviews or anything?
Well, I can give an indication of like, it's obviously, it links to the previous question, and it's around like continuous discovery, and it never stops, especially with conversational interfaces. Like, and it's not only like you launch a feature, you need to monitoring and have a constant iteration, but also like continuous discovery of new insights, new pain points that users have. And around testing a number of participants, like I would say, like from my experience, like 30 to 50 participants for small features, or around 100 for something big. Now with Gen AI, I would definitely lean more towards 100, obviously depending on funding and methods that you have in place. And it depends, like from my perspective, we use an internal platform because we have a system in place, but in the past, I've used Amazon Mechanical Turk, for example, for chatbots, which is a bit easier. Obviously, when we're talking about voice assistants, there are other methods as well. I remember I had used in the past Voice Flow. They had like Test Me, which you could send to testers. So it depends on the application.
Yeah, I mean, like Wizard of Oz testing, honestly, is just like such an easy lo-fi way to do it, where if it's not familiar for folks, that's just where you are like behind the curtain and you are playing the role of the system, and it changes slightly if you're doing Gen AI, because obviously you are you can kind of just make stuff up as long as it is in similar style to what your responses are from your prompt. So basically you have to do some setup of like using your prompt with something like ChatGPT or whatever LLM system you're using to understand like what is the language and the formatting that you are getting, so that you can properly reflect that in your responses. But that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we don't always have a lot of bandwidth or time or resources or funds to do, extensive, like what you were saying, Nikoletta, having 100 user, like that's awesome. That would be wonderful. And sometimes, yeah, we just can't afford it. So I think, yeah, you can do user testing, like you said. I totally agree. There's varied ways of doing it to still get a lot of benefit from it. So I'd recommend, our team definitely does that. They use each other. They use the other teams in the company. I've used my husband before, as I've used my mom, just general users that aren't close to your business that you can just see what they're thinking, because we're always so close to it. We need to find individuals that can give us information that isn't biased as well. So yeah, totally agree with doing anything you can to get that data. Yeah.
Yeah, and as far as programs, I've used Figma in the past to mock up chat prototypes. Voice Flow, if the company has it, is great for both chat and voice. And I recently used Lookback. It's a user UXR platform that I really liked, because you could do longer form studies, like 2-3 weeks, a month time frame, where you could send folks surveys. You can also screen record, or I think video record their faces, their reactions to certain features. So those are the programs I've used in the past too.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to get to a couple audience questions. So I'm going to start with Monica's. This is kind of going back to Gen AI a little bit, but can testing eliminate the non-deterministic aspect of Gen AI answers? And can testing and refining eliminate hallucinations entirely, or does there have to be a more structured architecture, especially important in safety critical environments like healthcare, where the answer must be correct every time?
Yeah, I would say in our development of Gen AI platforms, No, it does not totally eliminate it that I've seen anyway. It definitely, I think it's required and you need to do it, and you need to have very thorough test scripts and test formats to be able to, like, you were saying, Diana, just different things you're testing that you didn't have to test before. I do think that's important, but I don't think that we could say, well, I've tested it, 50 different variations and it's never going to hallucinate. I feel like there's so many other variables, and now with what the user says, what comes before what the user said, the context, even again, the actual advancements that the LLM platforms like OpenAI makes to their platform that could change, so I haven't seen yet something that I could completely rule out any type of hallucination, but we can definitely help prevent them. We can definitely help ways to detect them and to test for them, but not, I haven't, unless you guys have. I would be very curious to see if you have ways that I would love to hear that, but so far, no, I'm not confident to say that we have prevented hallucinations through testing.
Yeah, I agree. No, the answer is no, sorry. But what testing does is it gives you confidence in the risk level.
Yeah.
So it allows you to say, like, we are going to be okay with 60% correct answers coming through, and we are going to know that 40% are not, and we have to keep monitoring, and we have to put safeguards in place to allow for that. And I think if you do have something that has to be pretty deterministic, like health or safety, GenAI is probably not the platform for you right now.
Yeah, that gets back to people coming in with these ideas like, give me Gen AI. And then you were saying, Diana, like, maybe that's not the modality for you. Maybe that's not the technology for you, depending on what they want to do. Totally agree. Yeah.
And definitely around like safeguards and like in healthcare, testing is required, because it's a regulated industry. There's no way around it. So that's why I'm talking like 50 to 100, because that's like, to have the product speaking to patients, this is what needs to happen. So I would definitely say, like, it doesn't eliminate the benefits of Gen AI. And like, we've seen what happens in Gen AI assistants that haven't thoroughly been tested. I don't know if everyone knows, like, the DPD chatbot in the UK, that it was saying negative things about DPD and saying better things about its competitors to a user. This sort of thing is, from my perspective, not acceptable to go to customers. And that's why it should be tested, and to prevent these sort of things. And of course, there are automated metrics that can be in place. At Euphonia, we've explored LLMs. We have a paper and research done around how LLMs can be used safely for patients, again, in a research level. But there are loads of considerations, because there is high risk, high reward.
Absolutely. Oh, Kim, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Just one thing on that. Testing is great. And what I found the most impactful has been working with the data science teams and the evaluation teams on the data sets that you're training the LLM on. In particular, any research papers, any assistant responses that are being edited, making sure that the content editors or whoever you're using to edit the responses and label perhaps images, making sure that they're high quality, and then the people who are reviewing all of that have some sort of background or context to whatever LLM or bot that you're creating, because that really changes how your bot responds, if based on the quality and the evaluation metrics that your bot is trained on.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we have, speaking of executives, any thoughts about UX research and usability testing as a threat to executives who might be exposed as not as knowledgeable as they made themselves out to be about their business and users? Any good stories about your user research or usability testing findings getting dismissed or ignored?
It happens all the time. Truly all the time. So sorry, it doesn't get better. But something that I have found, there's one story that's popping into my head where I think one of our first share outs on this big healthcare client that we were working with, where they had like 75 hospital systems across the country. And you can imagine lots of data coming in from across all those places. So they're used to like a really big scale of data. And we were doing a qual study for them. So I think we spoke with like 25 people that were representative of the group that they were looking to create a product for. Like, I think perfectly fine for getting directional patterns. Their marketing person, who is used to doing market research, she used to having quant data, basically like came at us and like head of marketing in front of like a whole group and was like, this is not reliable. This, you know, all sort of like the stuff that we would get used to as qualitative folks hearing from organizations that are maybe a little more quantitative oriented. But it was an opportunity because we were able to connect with that person outside of the meeting. We sort of like took it in the meeting, defended UXR to the extent that we could, but like accepted that critique. And then afterwards connected with them and said, okay, let's hear what is the data that you have? And so the next time that we came to the table, we came with their data correlated with our data. And we were able to present a really, not only a convincing story to that person, but to the rest of the team. And there was a sort of alignment and buy-in moving forward that might have been coming from a place of not respecting UXR or feeling like their data was getting challenged in some way previously, but it really helped to kind of like get everybody on the same page together.
That's great. Yeah, it just reminded me of the similar, I think. I don't think we came out of the same outcome though as you did. Where same thing, where this group, they came to the table saying they had all of the data in their heads. They knew what intents were being asked. They knew their customers. They knew it very well. And we were challenging that, saying, okay, well, that's great. I hope you do. But do we have any additional data? Can we collect some additional data? And actually, we ended up, this customer was so adamant. And again, we're in the industry where we have to balance what the customer says and what we're trying to do. So in this case, we went live with what there was in their heads. So, and then it ended up, it actually came out okay, where with the scope and the intents and things like that were okay. But yeah, it was a challenge. It was a battle that I could have pushed more for, but we kind of decided at that point, let's just let the data run, let it see for itself, and then we'll see, and then we'll go and iterate along the way. But yeah, that's good to hear that you were able to come to the table, because I think that's the ideal is, kind of come to a compromise solution. And so, yeah, I guess I'll just put it out there that not all times we've been successful with that, but we do try. So I hear you.
Anything else?
Well, from my perspective, I've been quite lucky because we're a small company, and like as soon as there's data on the table, the whole company believes the data instead of opinions, and that's a really good trade. And anytime there is kind of like stakeholder pushback, or I think putting out the data and that's not an opinion, just of one person, which sometimes, again, Diana, I totally understand, like with qualitative, it's way more easily arguable from other people, because like, oh, well, that's the opinion of a few people. Is it really though? Does the data, is it enough people to prove your point? So like having that combination of qualitative and quantitative always helps, because especially executives believe in the data. So it's for their best interest, right? Like we're all trying to put business value and improve the experience. So if there is a shared goal and shared understanding, then that's all it works. And then apart from that, it's kind of like managing the relationship and like giving someone what they want in one place and getting what you want in another.
So going back a little bit, we do have another question about safeguards. So what are the best safeguards apart from human supervision for LLMs, as testing won't cover all the scenarios? I think that's a great question.
I can comment. I think it maybe relates to what Diana was saying before, of just there are certain frameworks I think you can put in place that test for things that we, again, aren't used to testing. So is like how many, like what percentage of times is it accurate, reliable, privacy, all that kind of stuff that LLMs are known for not being so good at. So I think the testing framework, some automated process in that testing framework, like you said, there's the idea of like what changed, like, so it was answering this and now is it answering this, and the consistency. So I think there's some automated abilities to put into that place that could be very powerful. I still think though you can't take the human completely out of it, but I do think you can supplement that human with some processes to help validate, I guess, what it's producing. So yeah, I think it's possible. It's just, I think we're also still figuring it out too. It's so new that we're just trying different things and seeing what works.
Exactly.
Yeah, to that experimentation, I think some of the stuff that we've found that's work is when you are able, like not everybody's able to create their own LLM. That's a giant undertaking. So fair enough that like most people are setting things up with like a version of something like ChatGPT. So if you can have the ability to set up like your private data lake within that, basically meaning like a walled in information garden, you can then basically craft a prompt that tells the system that it should be pulling from that data set before pulling from anything else, or only from that data set and never anything else. You can put things like never make up an answer. If you don't know, say, I don't know. Like there are things that you can do to tell the system in that way that fall into that more like design/technical side of things, not so much in the testing that I am aware of.
Yeah. Does anyone else have?
Yeah, I think like as Celene said, like at this stage, everyone's trying to figure it out. And certainly at that point, you can't take out the usability testing with actual humans out of the loop, but it always is in parallel with automated metrics in place. So I think that's where the industry is at the moment. But maybe in the future, we're going to see that we have amazing automated metrics and LLMs don't hallucinate ever. So
That's next gen, yeah, like
Right.
sci-fi world. That's kind of cool, but it's also creepy, but very cool.
Yeah, and since we're all on the frontier, I think it's easy for certain teams to go faster than others, and it's a bit chaotic. So, just knowing that we're in the space and that we're kind of our own, like we bridge teams together, like design with engineering, with product, and realizing that we have to be in those meetings. We have to be in the loop as well, because we help communicate information between all these teams. And ultimately, we're the advocate for the user, right? So I think that along with what Diana and Celene and Nikoletta said, I think being able to realize that we're sort of in a space that we're all learning, but to advocate for ourselves, for design and for the user, and be part of all of those meetings, because it's really difficult, I think, when everything's going really fast all at once and people want to push out a product.
Yeah, and I think maybe related to this, before we get to other like audience questions, because I see we have a lot of them, maybe we could also get to like other strategies. Like we kind of got to it with Diana's story, but like what are ways to try to advocate for UX research and like prove the value of it, especially because there's always really tight deadlines, or like maybe someone in leadership isn't super convinced about it, and since all of you have such an experience, I think it would be really valuable to share if you can.
Yeah, I mean, from our approaches, I usually take data from previous examples that we've deployed saying, this client, we did this, and we, this is our process, and this is what worked, and this is the value that they got, and this is the results they got. And that sometimes allows a client to trust us enough to do the process we want to do. Like I said, sometimes not. Sometimes, they want to do their own thing, and that's okay. We're here to support them. But it's our job to at least tell them what the best strategy is. And I like to, I guess, data for data. I guess you're presenting previous data of how the data can help you in the future and why it would work. So that's one approach anyway.
Nikoletta?
Yeah, I was more thinking like even in the same product, like I can see and I can prove to my company, like, look at all these features that we built before we had UX research processes in place. What were the impact? Did they give the impact that we expected, or we kind of like spend a lot of energy for something that in the end didn't have as much impact in the experience? And I take features that we'll build based on the insights that I brought to the table, and these actually have a big impact. And that's the business value, and that's how you prove that the UX researcher and this function needs to be on the table on strategy, and not something that we do on the side just a little bit, because that's very important to have and see the impact of it.
I'm actually curious what the biggest insights you've gotten, or like what are the most surprising takeaways you've gotten from user research and usability testing?
I have a recent one that was very interesting and surprising. I think like the theme of it, the title would be that's like assumptions and us projecting our own beliefs and experiences into our users. And that's like at our company, like we have the assistant, it's a telephone-based assistant. And obviously like the whole company is very familiar with conversational AI, and we have certain expectations because we are inside the field, but our users are elderly primarily. So completely different population. So we've been saying like maybe we should change the text-to-speech provider just so it sounds better, just so it sounds natural. The one that we have now isn't great. And like the patients on the other side say that the voice of the assistant is amazing. It sounds like human, and they're very excited by it. So why we project our assumptions and we would spend energy implementing and integrating a new provider when actually it wouldn't make any difference to our users? So that's just one funny one from last week.
That's a great example. Yeah, similar to that, it made me think about, we have a client too that their demographic, same thing, or like 55 plus, basically. It's like a wholesale retail store. And we went into it thinking like, yeah, natural language, like it's the future, and everybody wants to talk to these things, right? No one wants to press buttons and do DTMF. And actually that group does. They really want to do DTMF. They don't really like natural language. They like the old style consistency, comfort level of the DTMF, even though it might take longer to get to your answer, it might be more restrictive. It's comforting. And I think we see better results with it typically. So yeah, so we've actually implemented more DTMF in that app than normal because of the demographic. That surprised us too. Totally. Yeah, it's our predictions and biases can definitely surprise us for sure.
I think along the lines of assumptions, this is more in the realm of like the optimization and continued iteration testing, and why it's important. We had this was years ago when I worked at a healthcare company, we had some IVR outreach, and it was, we were doing flu shots and trying to both give information and collect information from folks that potentially needed a flu shot. So one of the questions that we asked them was, when was the last time that you had your flu shot? We did some usability testing, and we like thought we got all of the responses in of things like days of the week, or approximate months, or like 6 months ago kind of responses. And we were like, great, we're good to go. Sent it out, and then we're reviewing the transcripts later and realized that we missed a huge bucket of like the mental model, which was, hang on, let me go check my calendar. Didn't even consider that somebody might have written this down and then wanted to like go check it. So we were erroring out folks that were totally within reason and made perfect sense. And so we were able to catch that and make a change and be able to collect that information.
That's really cool. Yeah, great example.
Kim, anything?
I think along the lines of assumptions, I was working on an LLM project for medical professionals, and we assumed that medical professionals would love this product and find it useful, which they did. But one of the things they really wanted to see was images and video, which is in huge demand, because even though this project product would save them time, because now they can ask this database natural language questions. They wanted to see images and videos, because that would save them even more time. In the medical space, it's very visual. So that was something surprising for how much they pushed for it. We knew they wanted images and videos, but that was basically the tipping point. Does this have images and video? It doesn't. Well, it's not useful to me.
Interesting. And I love how some of these examples are kind of like in itself stories for like pushing the value of UXR, because it's like, you really didn't know, or like you might even be saving money because you're not using a new provider now that you know the one you have is fine.
Yeah, it's true. I think the great rule of thumb is we don't know, like we think we know, and we could go in with our assumptions, but we should never assume that our assumptions are right. I mean, human behavior is changing, the industry is changing, the technology is changing, the preferences are changing, the demographics are changing. So all of that affects, it's funny because I think, like I wouldn't do that, but I'm realizing how I'm not like the rest of the human population. And we just have to accept, everybody's how they want to interact with these things. And it's different than what we might have thought. Totally.
Exactly. And I think we also underestimate, I think like we've all kind of talked about the medical field. And one of the recent things was we are expanding in the US, and there was a doctor and he was like, my patients want to see me. They wouldn't be happy with an assistant automating this process. Absolutely not. The next patient comes in, and when he was asked like, oh, would you be happy to do that over the phone with an assistant, he was like, oh yes please, because I had to travel in here, drive, park, and like the assumptions of this doctor were completely wrong and proven right in front of them. So it's that, and asking the right questions and like leaving your biases on the side as much as possible. We cannot completely do that because we're human beings, but be conscious of that.
Yeah, and it also, well, to Matt's comment here, it makes things more inclusive for people if you have more options and if you catch.
It's true. Yeah, we definitely always use it as fallback, but now we're actually using it as primary. So definitely, it's true that there's other considerations too to other users that you have to take it as accessibility would definitely be one of them for sure.
Yeah. I'm actually curious, does anyone use any like concrete metrics tied to UX research and usability testing? To like, I guess, prove the value of it or measure how things progress once you're doing it?
Yeah, I think, things we've seen too, the ultimate goal is one thing, right? Like the ultimate KPIs you're trying to get to around like containment, around things like that. But there are shorter term things that you can see right within your testing that I think are evident that you don't have to wait to launch it to see. So things like, the friction points, the effort, the number of turns, the time it takes, the number of like no match loops or no input loops that they have, things like that. So you can measure that all within, again, you can't, Wizard of Oz testing a little less so because it's a little less, you're just making things up. So that's more qualitative. But for actual, when you get metrics, if you can you can get a lot of those from the prototype that like we were saying, voice flow, things like that. You can see the whole conversation of how it's interacting with, and then you'll be able to iterate on those. But yeah, definitely in conversation, friction points, measuring those kinds of friction points is something we've looked at too.
Yeah, I think for Gen AI, again, because it's like so new, I don't know of any like sort of industry-wide metrics on that, but I've found overall, but like especially with Gen AI, that it's most impactful if you can baseline it within the organization or the user base that you're going to be launching this first. And it's okay. It's actually almost even better if it's just like a really terrible version of it. Like your just first prototype, baseline it with like a group that's safe to baseline it with, meaning like it's not going to ruin like you were talking about, Kim, it's not going to ruin your company's brand to test it with these folks, but they don't have necessarily the information. So like Celene, you were talking about friends and family or whatever, being able to baseline it and then be able to say like, okay, so now let's go do our improvements, let's do our usability tests, let's go through our design process, and now let's re-baseline it, and we can take a look and see like what is the impact here. And that even if there's no necessarily like monetary tie, the confidence that people will feel is oftentimes invaluable in terms of like getting that funding for next project or be able to take it to market or all the things that you need to be able to do.
And does that go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to reiterate, I totally forgot about that. But yes, that's one thing I always tell my team, that set expectations of what those numbers, that they will be low. And that is okay. Because so we have gotten into hot water so many times where they get those first initial focus group numbers or whatever like that, and they're low. And we always have to say, that's okay. That's what we're going to fix. But so many times clients have been hung up on that. And they say, oh, it performed so poorly, we're not going to launch. We have to do 10 more iterations of this before we launch. And they just get in that sticky, like it didn't perform well the first time, so they don't trust it. But the whole point is to not have it perform well the first time. That's the point. So I second 100% Diana, setting those expectations, because you will get stuck and you'll have, like you said, in our case, delays go to market for sure. That happen. Yeah, totally agree. Sorry, Emily, go ahead.
No. Does anyone else? Oh, Kim?
Yeah, I think, yes, having a set baseline and seeing how research does and how testing does over iterations, and also being an advocate for accessibility standards for different modalities. I think we are the designers, we are the people who will advocate for accessibility standards, because oftentimes I see engineering product teams really go so fast that they sort of leave those accessibility standards behind, especially in new modalities and new spaces. So having, oftentimes I've been the one in the room advocating for accessibility standards, for screens, for voice, making sure that that is part of the evaluation metrics that a product is launching with and testing with.
And how do you advocate for that within like user research and usability testing?
I can answer that. So what I've done is looking at for screens text accessibility. I know NNG has great resources. Typically in the bigger companies, there's user research teams that have standardized design systems with accessibility components already written out. So bringing another user researcher into those conversations. So those are some of the ways I've advocated.
Awesome. Any other thoughts on that?
Usually advocated, again, because of like the work that I do, I tend to get brought in for like new products. And so a lot of that is just, you have an idea and you need to ensure that you have risk minimization for taking this idea to market. So the value of user research is really ensuring that you have a product or a service that is going to land. And in order to ensure that it's going to land, you have to know that you have the right audience and you understand their behaviors and you understand how to properly create this thing so that it will get used and it will get adopted by people.
Yeah. I know we're almost at time, so I guess we'll just finish with one last question, and that's, do you have any advice for people that are doing user research, or any other final thoughts?
So I have one for like people that are also involved in the product itself. And it's sometimes you can do user interviews and you can hear things that are negative about the thing that you've been building or your company's building. And that just, you don't need to take it personally. Just like detach yourself, and like you're always the voice of the user. So you need to hear them and respect them and accept any opinion that they have, and just try to understand the best of your abilities without taking it personally and being offended, because that can turn out negatively and get defensive. That's how you can have a very negative user interview. So that's, just don't take it personally and accept everything they say.
That's great. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, maybe in addition to what we kind of said already a little bit, like around the bias, avoid the bias, iterate, just don't stop, just don't do it once and done. I think the other thing we talked about a little bit, but I'll emphasize again, is around don't pass up qualitative insights too. Listening to that call, but so many times you hear and it's like that little sigh tells you so much more than a piece of data ever could, right? So, you could count how many sighs, I guess, are in a call, right? Something like that. But I mean, just that we are humans and we pick up on those types of things, and that really helps you make the right decisions too. So yeah, so don't balance both qualitative and quantitative insights.
The last thing, I'll add one more thing to that, which is ask forgiveness, not permission. So many times we don't get budget, we don't get time, we don't get anything else for UXR. I just do it. I mean, barring like not breaking NDAs or ethical guidelines as just a blanket statement, but like I will go and do, like, if I can't get a hold of users, I will go do a lit review. If I can't get a hold of a budget, then I will talk to friends and family. If I don't have a recruiter, then I will hit up people on LinkedIn. Hear from me all the time because I'm like, oh, hi, you were in this job that I can't find people for. Like, you get creative and you find a way to get some information, because some data is better than no data.
Yep. Agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. Some data is better than no data. And funding really matters. If your project isn't funded, then it's not gonna get worked on. So that's one of the lessons, like, oh, duh, that's right. But it's often forgotten when people have new ideas, right? When product, especially C-suite level execs have ideas and they come to you directly, and it's like, is there funding for that? And then there's crickets. So, asking if there's funding. If not, you can get really creative with UXR methods too.
This is all amazing advice. We're at time, unfortunately. I wish we could go on, but thank you all so much for being here. This was super insightful, and we have a couple other panels coming up, so stay tuned for those, and have a great evening and rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.